This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Welcome back to our subject of the Tzava Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. So we mentioned part one. We spoke about the family origins of Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid, Rabbi Shmuel Hachasid, known as Rabbi Shmuel Hanavi. Part two, we spoke about Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid himself, how we have a tradition. Had he been in earlier generations, he would have been counted among them. Part three, we did the opinion of the Noda Yehuda. The Noda Yehuda in Even Ezer Tinyana Siman Ayin Tes pointed out that he doesn't usually get involved in these types of issues, but he does point out that many of the things that Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid said are against Shas. And the Noda Yehuda says that you should engrave on your heart the following rule, that any sage after the Talmud does not have permission to say one word against the Talmud. And someone who says one word to contradict even the thorn of a yud, of the Shas, is not going to be nechshav b'chlal chachmei Yisrael. Now, if we find someone, the Noda Yehuda said, who is muchzak in Torah and Yerush Shamayim, who says something against the Gemara, we are forced to say that that individual only meant l'sha, or only meant for a specific family. Likewise, said the Noda Yehuda, regarding the Tzava Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid, he said things that kamat, you're not allowed to, you took my original, that kamat, you're not allowed to listen to. How is that? Said the Noda Yehuda, he said a father and son cannot marry two sisters. We know Rav Papa and his son married two sisters. He said two brothers can't marry two sisters. So if you look in the Gemara and Brachos on Daf Mem Dalet, and we pointed this out, that there was a city in Eretz Yisrael whose name was Gufnis. There were 80 pairs of Kohanim married to 80 sisters, right? So it's against the Gemara, said the Noda Yehuda. He said, and the two daughters of Rav Chisda were married to Rami and Mar Ukva Bar Chami. Now, if the Chassid was mitzvah, this tzava to all of Klal Yisrael, he'd be contradicting the Gemara, which is impossible, and we wouldn't be able to listen to him. So Noda Yehuda said that the Rabbi Yehuda Chassid only commanded his descendants, because he saw Baruch HaKodesh that his descendants would not be successful engaging in these shidduchim. And Rabbi Yehuda Chassid was only talking to his family. That's number one. Number two, the Noda Yehuda said, in this circumstance, there's no chashash at all, for two reasons. And that is, the Rabbi Yehuda Chassid was only talking about the ikar name given to somebody at the time of birth, but not a name added b'shas Shinoi Hashem, because that name is the name Lebracha. So since his name Lebracha, a bracha doesn't count against you. The same way a koishel bracha is not going to get you into trouble with even number of koisais. You could count it, or you don't have to count it. Whatever works out, you're allowed to do. And Bechlal, he said, it would not be darkei noyam that here a person got married, and afterwards Nebuch, the husband, had to change his name, and now it's the same name as the shver, and now, he's out to lunch. Now, I would say it's his fault. He picked the wrong name. Who asked him? His father is Yankov Yisrael Pinchas Minchas. His name is Yankov Yisrael Minchas. So don't add Pinchas. Add Feivel. What's he doing adding? But this says in Noda Yehuda, it's not Darkei Noyam that she would have to divorce him. And besides that, it sounds like the issue at hand is a girl wants to marry a Talmid Chacham. Well, that's a mitzvah. It says the Noda Yehuda, it's a wonder on the whole world. Everybody's looking for a nice guy, but they don't mind if the guy is an Am Haaretz. That's a much bigger problem than the problem of the Tzava Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. So if I may, let's skip for a moment just a few Maramakaimis to number 53. Okay? Let's skip to number 53. Say, how in the world? The answer is 53 is what I was preparing late last night, only a few hours ago. No, but there's a tshuva over here from the Zichron Yehuda. Zichron Yehuda, Rav Greenwald, who wants to answer the Noda Yehuda's kasha. How's that? Again, the Noda Yehuda's kasha is from the Gemara and Brachos, right? Gemara and Brachos that we quote number 4, that there were 80 Kohanim in Gufnis married to 80 sisters. Well, let's take a look. Gufnis. You say, where is Gufnis? How come I never went there? I never went there on a tour with Pesach. What's it? Somebody up here. There's another famous Pesach Levi. He never took me to Gufnis. Well, listen to this. There's a Medrash in Eicha. Rabbi Yirmiyah b'shem Rav Chia bar Abba Amar Shmoinim achim kohanim hayu nesuim l'shmoinim kohanes achayos. 80 kohanim brothers were married to 80 kohanim sisters. B'layla echad, in one night. Talunu b'chada gafna, they were hung on one branch. So apparently what it seems to be saying is what? That they did not meet a pleasant end. So we're going to see Shalshuv Zichron Yehuda. Greenwald says, Noda Yehuda, you bring a raya from the Gemara that the Gemara says that they all that 80 brothers married 80 sisters. Ru'uma also b'hem. Look what happened to them. This is not a proof you're allowed to. If anything, is a proof to Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. That's not a good idea. Look at number 54. Shalshuv Zichron Yehuda, Simon Kuf Tzadivav. Michtov kabalti v'alderech shailas Rabbi Yaakov hineo emes k'mash gozer kahadros goyin b'noid Yehuda shafia gemar v'adei motor doshmayim zugim nasu achos amnam hakasu hamafarshim shachasid einay cholei klala gemar chas v'shalom digam oisay ihu moide shemoter al pi halacha Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid agrees you're allowed to v'rak kasu shlo yasagim esakana v'zeh How come they were all hung? So it's not a kasha of Yehuda Hachasid, it's a riot of Yehuda Hachasid. You're right, they did it. Look what happened to them. So Rabbi Vadi Yosef in the Shalsha Tshuvas Yabia Omer, and we're going to be quoting from him quite often in this subject. It's Chelek Beis Siman Zayin Ois Gimel. Says the Yabia Omer, V'ra'isi b'Shalsha Tshuvah Zichron Yehuda, Shegol Taras Kushas Haned Yehuda, that all these people were hung. However, if you look in the Yifei Anaf of there, the Girsa, it says Kalalinhu Bahada Gufana. It says not Talinhu, not they were hung, but they were married in a place called Gufna. And in fact, the Shalsha Shem Aryeh brings up this question on Yehuda, and he says, lest somebody say, oh, but look what happened to them, if there's a girsa over there, that they were married in Ir Gafna. And now, so again, there's a discussion about this particular proof of the Noda Yehuda. It's very interesting. Okay, let's proceed. We're going to give another example. Right? And Rabbi Vadia said about the words of the Noda Yehuda, Dvar of Chayim v'Kayamim. His words are alive and they are sustained. Meaning that he agrees with that sentiment. That the Iker is what is found in Shas and Poskim, and no one has the authority after to argue and to change. Well, take a look at number 7. It's a Gemara in Soita on Daf Yud Amud Beis. Amar Shmuel Saba Chamua de Rav Shmuel Bar Ami Mishmei de Rav Shmuel Bar Ami. Shmuel the elder, the father-in-law of Rav Shmuel Bar Ami, said in the name of Rav Shmuel Bar Ami. 1 second. Shmuel Saba was a father-in-law of Rav Shmuel? How did he take him as a son-in-law? How could Shmuel take a Shmuel as a son-in-law? Bad idea. Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid would not agree with that, right? Would Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid approve of that shidduch? If Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid was there at that vart, he would have said, someone change your name. And in fact, in the Seder Hadoros is brought over here that Venira Mizeh Shalai Hayu Nizharin. From here we see they were not makbid on the tzava of Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. Shalai Hayu Shemcha V'chasnai Echad Asher Hizer Al Zeh B'tzavas Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. So this is brought as a raya that even the Amoraim were not really that careful about the tzava of Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid. Well, that's what the Noda Yehuda says. But again, this would seem to be another indication that it was only for his own family. Now, right? So this would l'chora be a raya to the Noda Yehuda. What would you say? A good raya or not a good raya? So.
Shaba and the other one is Shmuel, right?
Uh-huh.
Same name.
Saba is this.
Would you say this is a good raya? So look at number 50. If you don't mind, please take a look at number 50. This is the first time we learning from this person's sefer. One of the early Rabbanim in Prague was Rav David Oppenheim. When Rav David Oppenheim was nifter, we learned that the Rabbanos in Prague was vacant for something like 20, 30 years. And one of the reasons is because Rav David Oppenheim said on his deathbed, the next Rav of the city will be mayor. The problem is there were no worthy candidates named mayor. Until we said the Noda Yehuda came along, and when they wanted to hire him, they said just one problem. What's your name again? Yecheskel. Yecheskel, man. So what do you have to be called mayor? They told him the story. He said, no, this is what Rav David Oppenheim meant. When Rav David Oppenheim was on his deathbed, so they asked Rav, of course you're not going to leave us, but just in case you do, who do you think is going to be the next, who should be the next Rav in Prague? Baal Batim have their way of, they came to the Rav, wasn't feeling well, and they said the board voted 6-4 to wish you were for Shalema. So they asked Rav David Oppenheim, they said, who should be the next Rav in Prague? He said, mayor, and then he passed away. It's a problem. So none of you said, no, this is what Rav David Oppenheim meant. That we know that when somebody's a goy says, we assume they're going to die. Except Rav Meir's shita. Rav Meir's choshish for the miyad of goysesim that live. What Rav David Oppenheim was saying is, why do you want to bury me already? What about Rav Meir's shita? Rav Meir's shita is, I still have a shot. Oh, so they liked that shot, and Rav Yehuda got the job. But anyway, we have a tshuva here, which is, what's amazing is, maybe in the 50s and 60s, this was only in manuscript form, and now it's printed. Says Rav David Oppenheim, in number 50, Ube'emes miyayim amdi al dati. From the day, common sense was kicked into my mind, Hayisi matmiya al ktsas anoshim. I wondered about some people, shenoisim es b'noisem leish, that they marry their daughters to a man, asher shmai shava l'shmai, that his name is, the Shver and the Edom have the same name. Shneim yeshem shem echad b'shava. Oh, so how did they get out of it? He's Shmuel Yankel, and he's Shmuel Feivel. As if that makes a difference. He says, they add a name, Lakinoi. And they make it, but you're both called Shmuel. No, they usually call me Yankel, and they usually call him Feivel, even though nobody knows him as Yankel, nobody knows that guy as Feivel. V'oisim ha'ikr l'tafel, v'tafel l'ikr. Like they make believe the second name becomes the main name. Kihechi dila ashnuye Hashem, to change the name. V'lo l'hav shinu ma'isa, Rav, Leo Shem Shemes Ma'aretz, my Mahani Lahem, Shtu Somam and Hagam. Kishema Yadasu Ikar, Paidar Satfela. In other words, it's a secondary name, it's not a real name. And B'chol Zeh Yisi Kakari Tagar, V'lo Yalad V'vlad, Hat Toimeh Me'avais HaMasigim Beheseg Yad HaKseves Tam. I didn't get this custom. This was a bad custom in my eyes. But says Rav David Oppenheim. By the way, it's a zchus to learn the Torah of David Oppenheim. You could go a lifetime, never learn one word from Rav David Oppenheim. Or even hear his name. Mamish, one of the early Achronim. He says, Amnam achar ha'iyan matzasi ein min hagen shoysol matzasi oven min hagen shoysol Torah. The custom of Jewish people is Torah. V'shari lahu tigra. Ki zeicher l'davar mi'a'ika. There is a remiss to this. Mehadi isa b'mesachta soita. Oh, Mar Shmuel Saba, Chamud Rav Shmuel Bar Ami, Mishmad Rav Shmuel Bar Abba, Mishmad Rav Shmuel Bar Ami. What do I need to know this whole Zach? Shmuel this, said the name of Shmuel that. Just get to the point. Just tell me, right? Hine Sichai Shatmei Cham Tzrichen Limad. Hadekam Shmuel Saba, Ma She'ena Nimsa Brehita B'Shas. When do we ever find such an expression, Shmuel Saba? Ella laharos mahani tasa lesaba to lahavi shem chamuhu v'chasnei shavim ke'achad. That name, Grandpa, just Grandpa, that alone makes it a differentiation. And a proof that an added name could become an ikar name is Yaakov Avinu. What is Yaakov's main name? Yisrael. Even though that's not the name given at birth. So, right, like the Gemara says, Lo yikare shimcha od Yaakov kim Yisrael yeh shemecha. Lo yishe Yaakov shem Yaakov kamel Yisrael yeh ikar v'Yaakov tafel. Meaning a second name could be an ikar name, says Rav David Oppenheim.
We call him Yaakov. We don't call him Yisrael.
So, but it's not. That's not his real name.
Yaakov, right?
We use a secondary name. Okay, so back to the ranch. Back to the beginning. Let us go back to the Noda Yehuda. Again, the Noda Yehuda Shita was that Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid cannot argue on the Gemara, and whatever he says must be only for his own descendants.
But even for his own descendants, would it be arguing on the Gemara?
No, the Gemara is talking to the Klal, and Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid is saying that I happen to see Baruch HaKodesh, that it ain't going to work for my descendants. Now, if you look in the Shas HaTshuvas, Hain Yosef of Rav Zamiru, he says, number 9, V'imkein roi l'shmaya divrei Rabin Chasida, Bram kama shematzina b'talmud lahedya hepech dvarav ruim heim Rabbi Sin Balei Talmud l'smech aleim. V'lo yitehei Torah shalanu kema shekasav harav Noda Yehuda sham. We cannot allow our Torah to be reduced to its hava, meaning we rely on the Gemara. Now as we're going to see, what's the reason for all of these things? Not two brothers shouldn't marry two sisters. Don't marry a woman with the same name as your mother. What's the reason for it? We're going to have to get involved in what the svara is. Is it just a mystical reason? Is it a chayik? The Chida learns it's ayin hara. Well, says the Hain Yosef, what do you mean ayin hara? We're descendants of Yosef. The descendants of Yosef, there is no problem of ayin hara. Jews don't have to worry about ayin hara, and therefore just follow the Noda Yehuda, get married l'shem shamayim, and take care of your business, and don't worry about these spooky stuff. That's the Hain Yosef sort of supporting the view of the Noda Yehuda. Now, says Rabbi Vadia, this is a very, very important principle, that once Shas ended, nobody could argue. Why not? Why can't I argue on Shas? I'm a rabbi. I have smicha from Chavetz Chaim.
But you don't have the level.
I also have smicha from somewhere else. A Rav heard me on Yorda. Why can't I argue on the Gemara? Okay, so you say, you're right, I can. Why not the Vilna Gaon? Why can't the Vilna Gaon? He wasn't a rabbi? He wasn't big enough? He was big enough. Why can't the Vilna Gaon argue on the Gemara? Why couldn't the Rambam argue on the Gemara? Why not? Is there a halacha? Where does it say? V'shteit, that you can't argue on the Gemara. What's the makar? This is a very interesting question. It's a subject that really we should have a whole shir on. Can an Achron argue on a Rishon? We don't do it, but can he? Sometimes, it's amazing, they're out here, Baskal is making shadim, shaking the table. But argue on the Gemara? Sometimes, but on rare occasion. But argue on the Gemara, can't argue on the Gemara. What's the logic of that? So it's very interesting. If you look in the Kesef Mishnah, in the beginning of the second parak of Hilchos Mamrim, it says, whether Bezdin Hagadol could argue on an earlier decision of a court, it depends what it is. It depends whether it's a drasha or it's halacha l'moshe misinai. So the Kesef Mishnah says that if something is a drasha, the later Bezdin could argue on an earlier Bezdin. So this is a very fundamental piece in the Kesef Mishnah. If you take a look at number 10, it says, V'yim Taimar, you're going to ask, Imkain, Amai loy pligi amoroi atanoi. If a later court is allowed to argue on an earlier court, why can't an Amoira argue on a Tana? Right, in Shas, we'll always challenge an Amoira. Amoira! How could you say that? We have a Mishnah against you, a Bryce against you. Why doesn't the Amoira say? And what do you think, I'm chopped liver? I argue. I argue on the Mishnah. I argue on the Bryce. Why not? Why can't he say that? Why doesn't he? And the only way the Amar could get out of it is, I hold like a different Tana, and if he doesn't say that, he's out of the water. But according to the Rambam, that a later court could argue with an earlier court, why can't you argue with the Gemara? Why can't you argue with the Mishnayos? Ve'evshir loymar, It's possible to say, Shemiyoim Chasimas HaMishnah, the day that the Mishnah was sealed, Kimu v'kiblu, they had a convention, and they ratified, and they accepted, Shadoyrois V'achreinim La Yichlaku Ala Rishayim, that the later generations can't argue on the earlier ones. Now what does this mean? They rented out Madison Square Garden, and they got all the Gedolim together, and they said, we accept upon ourselves that nobody shall argue on the Mishnah. Did that happen? Was there such a historical event? Or does he mean it was implicit? V'cheinasu gam b'chasimas haGemara shemiyayim shenechtema lainitein reshus l'shum adam lachloik aleha. Well, says Rabbi Vadia, that being the case, we can never argue on the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid was a big tzaddik, a big goyin, but it doesn't matter. If the Gemara says you could marry your niece, you could marry your nephew, then Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid cannot tell people they can't. And if he did, he must have meant only to his family. Look in number 11, the Yabia Omer.
Do we know on what basis the Tanaim or the Amoraim, and they had this convention or whatever they did, what gave them the authority to say it's closed? And
they accepted upon themselves. They were Makayim it, they were Makabal it. It's a separate topic. It's a
generation was going to be on their level.
It's a separate discussion, but that's the rule. The rule is they convened and they made this Kabbalah, and it's case closed. Well, it says Rabbi Vadia. Rabbi Vadia says that if you look in the writings of Harav HaGoyin Maharam Susan, I was not able to find this. I was not able to find the chuvas of Maharam Susan, that he challenges a Noda Yehuda. And he said, what are you getting so worked up about? We know even something the Torah matters. Chazal Aser. For example, it says in the Torah, lend to a Gentile with interest. And Chazal came and said, don't do it. So, don't make a difference between, if the Chachamim later, after the Torah was given, could argue on the Chumash, why can't the sages after the Gemara make gezeros on the Gemara? For example, the Arizal did that in many things, many times, against Shas and Poskim. For example, the Arizal said certain brachos you make that according to the Gemara would be a bracha l'vatala. And many Gedolim follow what the Arizal said. So why would Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid be any less? Especially, he's not telling you to do something, he's telling you, b'shav al tasa. I mean, the Chachamim come along and they say, don't blow shofar on Shabbos. But Hashem said to blow shofar. So that means rabbis have power. So if the rabbis could say, don't blow shofar, why can't Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid say, don't marry your niece? Says Rabbi Vadia Yosef, I'm getting a stomach ache from this. Yes. He says, V'ruach bitni hitzikasni mipnei ayad shenishtalcha klape or oilam. It's like a dagger in my innards to hear this challenge against the Noda Yehuda, the light of the world, and his correct words. And I need to challenge Maharam Susan so that he does not support the Rishaim that think that in every generation the Chachamim can get up and say whatever they want based on the needs of the times. Says the Rabbi Vadia, you think the Noda Yehuda made up this klal that after Shas it's case closed? The Rishonim say, you're not even allowed to be machmir. The Regoinim cannot be machmir on what the Gemara says.
It doesn't happen all the time?
No. And the Kesef Mishnah writes, from the day the Mishnah and the Gemara was sealed, nobody could argue. The Maram Susan brought a raya from the fact that the Torah said lenachui tashech and the Chachamim answered it. So everybody knows what Rabbi Yosef Irgaz says about this. By the way, Rabbi Yosef Irgaz wrote a famous sefer, Shomer Amunim, on the introduction to Kabbalah. He also wrote a sefer Shas Divrei Yosef. So last summer, we were Zoicha, we were in Livorno. We found the kever of Rabbi Yosef Irgaz. Okay, I just thought I would throw that in. That the Chachamim did not aser, they only asered You're allowed to charge a Gentile interest if you need it for your livelihood, but not to make money. And only in Am Haaretz. But basically,
But the Gemara doesn't say that.
the Arizal paskins against Shas. Okay. If we could for why the Arizal is not against Shas, then we try to. And if we have no way to explain how he's not against Shas, then we don't listen to the Arizal. Now this is a famous machlokes between Rabbi Vadia and Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, whether the Arizal is the final say. But the opinion of Rabbi Vadia is the same thing with the Arizal. If we cannot figure out how the Arizal can be reconciled with Shas, we won't follow the Arizal, we'll follow what it says in the Gemara. So this is the Maram Susan's challenge on the Noda Yehuda, and the Rabbi Vadia sort of rises to the defense of the Noda Yehuda. Another historical fact is there was a man by the name of the Ravid. You ever hear of him? So, says the Rabbi Vadia, the Ravid, the Baal HaSagos, he was the son-in-law of another Ravid, whose name was Avram. And apparently the Ravid, who had Ruach HaKodesh, and who was a great Makobel, didn't have a problem marrying the daughter of this Rabbi Avram. So we see that it must be Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid meant it only for his family. Okay, let me just bring out just a historical phenomenon explaining who Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid was. It's brought in the biography of Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid that most of the Kadmonim, most of the Rishonim, were Meva'arei HaTalmud, Meva'arei HaHalachos HaPsukos, Mefurashim, Paiskim, in Halacha, and they did not really get involved too much in Divrei Agada. For example, the Rambam, the Yad HaChazaka, he talks about the halachos of Shas. He doesn't talk about the Agadata of Shas. Only Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid, he was what we call a Makayri, meaning he didn't view himself as a Mefaresh to explain the existing halachos, but rather he was someone who plumbed the wisdom of the Torah to create new ideas and new halacha and new hashkafa. Meaning like this.
What do you mean by plum?
We'll see. He paved a new shita in Dar Chalima and Halach and Agada to sort of follow in the footsteps of Chazal, utilizing the methodologies and the procedures of Chazal to be mamsi new halachas from the psukim, to create new reasons for halacha. Meaning, until then, all the Rishonim, this is what Chazal say, let's try to understand why they say it. Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid would say, well, Chazal derives certain halachas utilizing certain principles. Oh, let me figure out what those principles are, and we could mine new halachas as well, new ideas, new thoughts. That was the question now is, but Shas is closed. Rabbi Yehuda Hachasid, you're born too late to be what we call a Makari, someone who has new, novel ideas. Now that the Torah is closed, now all we could do is explain what has already been given. Okay, so this we will call the second part of sort of the halachic aspect of the shir, or we'll call it part 4, sort of defending the Noda Yehuda's position based on the Kesef Mishnah, explaining the challenge of Maharam Susan, and why Rabbi Vadia does not agree with that particular challenge. And ultimately, Rabbi Vadia very much defends the Shita of the Noda Yehuda. So this will end segment 4. Okay,
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.